was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. And when the Savior came that way, he looked up in the tree, and he said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. For I'm going to your house today. How many of y'all could have sung that with me, or at least part of the way through? I mean, that's one of those songs that has just stuck in our minds forever and ever, just like the story of Zacchaeus has stuck there. Here Luke, as he tells the rest of the story, the song pretty much tells it, it just leaves out one thing. Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd, for he was short of stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. Then Jesus stood and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because he, Zacchaeus, also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. The Word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. When I was very young, I can hear my grandfather and I can hear my mother. Some of the first words I remember, don't climb that tree. Well, that was just like waving a red flag in front of me. And it made me want to do what? Climb that tree. And I suspect all of us have had things like that in our lives. I grew up and I spent many hours in this mammoth magnolia tree that grew in my front yard. The tree was enormous. It was large and fat, and it was high, or at least that's the way I remember it. And I remember, and I truly do, the very first time that I climbed up in that tree, I had to jump up. You didn't know I could do that, did you? To catch hold of that branch and pull up and shinny up till I could get there on that branch. And then I very, very tentatively kept going up and going up. And the tree seemed so high, and it was very scary. But I couldn't resist going higher and higher. And finally, when I got to the top, or close to the top, the branches got thinner. And they got smaller. And I couldn't go any higher because I was afraid they would not bear my weight. So I stayed there. And I straddled the limb, and I held on tightly to it. And I loved, and I could hear the breeze and those magnolia leaves. You know, magnolia leaves are hard, and when they hit together, you can hear them. And I could hear that noise. And for a 6 or 7-year-old, it was just this exhilarating, joyful experience. But then the time came to go down the tree. And that's what really scared me, because as long as I was on my way up, I was always looking up. And I didn't realize how far down it was. If my foot slipped, if my hands let go, if something happened. So very, very, very carefully, I would make my way down branch by branch. And finally, I would get to the ground. And I'm sure that when I did that, my knees were shaking, but I was so excited that the fear really, it didn't make a whole lot of difference. And like any small kid, once I discovered that I could do it, guess what I did? Over and over and over. Again, it became as routine as taking a shower in the morning, brushing my teeth, whatever. And I still go by that tree about once every 2 weeks. It's 300 yards from here, over here at the corner of Linden and Idlewild. And my grandmother and my granddaddy and my mother, I'm not going to say they cussed that tree, but magnolia trees can drop a lot of leaves. And I know they said some ugly things about that tree, but I love that tree, and I still love it. Several years ago, they trimmed it somewhat. And it nearly broke my heart to see what they had done. But since then, it has grown back fuller, and it's this beautiful, beautiful tree. And that tree is very special to me. Well, our story today is about another tree climber. Only this isn't a child tree climber, this is an older tree climber. And really, he was too experienced with life to take the risk of being and finding himself out on a limb. Now, I want you to think about this. Only Luke, of the 4 gospel writers, tells us this story. And the story is Jesus is passing through Jericho. And he had nothing that he was going to do there in Jericho. There were no engagements set up. He wasn't going to have a preaching mission. He wasn't going to do any healing there. He was just passing through because he was on his way somewhere. He was on his way to Jerusalem. And at this point, Jerusalem was the focus. It was the focus of Jesus at this point. He was headed, for lack of a better term, toward his rendezvous with destiny. And nothing would keep him from keeping it. So Jericho really doesn't mean a whole lot. It's just a way station, a place one had to go through to get to Jerusalem. How many times have you driven to Nashville and you probably had to stop at exit 80A at the McDonald's at Jackson? That's a law in my family. Either 80A, 81A, or 82. They're McDonald's, all of them. It's a stop in the middle of the road. So, you know, Jericho was just nothing. And it doesn't figure prominently in Jesus' plans. But Jesus' trip through Jericho loomed large, very large in our story. And it loomed large in the mind of Zacchaeus. We're only told in this story 2 facts about Zacchaeus. The first one, he was a tax collector. That we know. The second one, he was short. So there we go. He was a tax collector and he was short. As the chief tax collector, Zacchaeus was a traitor to his people and to his nation. He was a collaborator and he was an agent of the imperialist Romans who had imposed their rule on Palestine both by military conquest and by occupation. They were considered tax collectors, the dregs of society, because his countrymen saw him as 2 things. He was a thief and he was a traitor. And I say a thief on purpose because even though Rome required a certain amount of taxes from its subjects, just like our government requires taxes from us, it also turned kind of a blind eye to the tax collectors. So that when they collected the taxes, they collected what was due Rome, but then they collected, maybe we would call it a surcharge or a surtax for their trouble. And Rome had no problem with them collecting whatever they could get the people to cough up. And that money, the tax collectors pocketed, and it became theirs. And as long as the tax collectors weren't so greedy that they incited a revolt, that tax collector was free to fleece his fellow citizens for as much as he could do. So, thinking in that vein, Zacchaeus was not, as you know, one of the most popular people there in Jericho. But the other fact is just as important. The other fact is Zacchaeus was challenged. He was height challenged, to be politically correct. You know, he was short. And that's what moves this whole story along. His shortness of height and stature prevents him from seeing over the people lining the street that were there to do just what he was going to do, to catch a glimpse of Jesus and his company as they passed through Jericho. We learned in Memphis yesterday that everybody loves a parade. There was a parade of how many, George, downtown yesterday?
20,000.
20,000 downtown, and then that parade moved and 60,000 people paraded where? To the stadium. So you had this massive movement of parade. How many of you all remember going to the Christmas parade downtown, or the different parades, the Veterans Day parade, and all the things that I did as a kid? Everybody loves a parade. One of the greatest things I've done was 3 years ago when we went to New York City on Thanksgiving Day and saw the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Now, I was 68 years old. I'm way too old for that kind of stuff. And friends, I want to tell you, it was magic. There's something about a parade that just makes us all happy. And there's really no excuse that's too trivial to have a parade. So, the townspeople are out to see this man whose reputation is going before him. This man from Galilee. He had spent most of his time in ministry there, and they're there to see him, and they are not about to move one way or the other so this little bitty shrimpy guy can see between them. They don't like him, they don't want to be near him, and he can just get way back behind him. So Zacchaeus is forced to do something that he probably hasn't done since he was a boy. He has to climb a tree. And he gets up into the tree. And his knees were probably a lot more creaky than they were back then. And it probably was a little bit more trouble for him than when he was 6 or 7. But I kind of think tree climbing is like bicycle riding. Once you've done it, you know how to do it. And you're not going to forget. And he gets up into the tree and he eases his way out onto a limb so that he'll have a really good view of Jesus when Jesus goes by. Now, you know what happens. Jesus comes along and he gets right underneath the tree where Zacchaeus is, and he says, "Zacchaeus, hurry up and come down, for I must stay at your house today." And Luke tells us, so he, Zacchaeus, hurried down and was happy to welcome him. But we got to stop here. We got to wait just a minute. Luke has left a whole lot out of the story. First of all, we don't know how Jesus knew that Zacchaeus was up in that tree. We don't even know how he knew Zacchaeus' name. There's no information given to us. And Zacchaeus must have nearly fallen out of the tree with shock and surprise when Jesus heard his name called, because Jesus had never laid eyes on Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus had never laid eyes on Jesus. Luke leaves us to wonder about so many of the details of this story. We don't get them. He was a tax collector. He was short. Jesus says, "Come down." Zacchaeus comes down. And the story itself, it's so succinct. It's so terse. And it's so to the point. But what happened? Go back to a couple of Wednesday nights ago. Jesus proposed. Zacchaeus responded. See how I like to connect dots between Wednesdays and Sundays? You had the proposition, You had the response. Now, we are not left to imagine what the reaction of the other people standing